finally tell us something off, bro. We seen the display the other day when she walked past reporters with her face up against the wall like this. Like she ain't want to talk to nobody. Well, I'm here to tell you, we finally get locker room footage. Now, this is something that we have not seen throughout this entire tournament. Videos of what is going down inside Team USA locker room.
She had not touched a competitive basketball court in 239 days. 6 months of brutal rehabilitation. Whispers that she might not be the same. Questions about whether the comeback would fully stick. And then Caitlin Clark walked into San Juan, Puerto Rico, stepped onto a FIBA court for the very first time as a senior Team USA player, and did something that nobody in the entire history of international basketball had ever done before. 5 world records in one game. On her debut, before most people watching had even figured out what they were witnessing. But here's the thing, that was not even the most interesting part of this story. What happened after that night is where it gets uncomfortable. The rotations that followed, the decision to keep her on the bench, the press conference that said everything while answering nothing, a head coach who quietly vanished with 3 games still left to play, and a replacement who walked in, made one almost offensively obvious adjustment, and immediately produced the most dominant performance of the entire tournament. The basketball world is still processing it, and the more you look at the full timeline, the harder it becomes to call any of this accidental. This is the complete story. Every detail, every uncomfortable question that still has no clean answer. If you already sense something is off about how all of this played out, you are not alone in that. Hit the like button and subscribe right now so you never miss a breakdown like this, because this one goes all the way to the bottom.
That Caitlin Clark is stuck on the outside looking in, and I feel like I have an idea why. Be honest with you guys, I believe there's some agenda going on. I believe Kara Lawson is back coaching Duke, the head coach of Team USA. She wasn't even there today. She wasn't even present, okay? I believe Nate Tibbitz was told, you do not start Caitlin Clark. Chelsea Gray is the starter no matter what.
To understand why what happened in Puerto Rico carries the weight that it does, you have to go back a few months before any of it started. Caitlin Clark arrived at the 2026 Team USA training camp, carrying more than just a basketball reputation. She had spent the previous 6 months working through a serious injury that kept compounding before it started to improve. This was not a rest period. It was not a planned break between seasons. It was a long, grinding rehabilitation process where the timeline was uncertain, the outcome was not guaranteed, and the daily work had no finish line she could see from where she was standing. When she arrived at camp, she was honest about where she was. She said she needed time to get her lungs back, time to find her rhythm again, time to rebuild the competitive sharpness that only returns through actually playing, not through workouts and rehab sessions.
Just the build up to games is probably the hardest part. Like once you're in the game and you're playing and you're flowing, like you don't think or realize anything else. It's almost the build up to get to that point. So I think that's kind of for me, like getting back in kind of that routine of how you prepare on game days and things like that. But I think after the first and second game, it will be like second nature, like it's always been. So more than anything, just really excited to be here.
Yeah. Once you start those games, it's 5 games in 7 days. Yeah. Just how are you going to ramp up to that and just make sure?
I guess we're going to find out like really quickly, like what type of shape I'm in. And
nobody questioned that. Veterans in the gym who watched her in practice reportedly could not take their eyes off what they were seeing, but Clark herself stayed measured, grounded, and realistic. She had been away from competitive basketball for 239 days. She knew exactly where she was and exactly what she still needed to find. That context matters enormously because of what she then proceeded to do the first time someone handed her a ball on an international stage. Players who have been healthy their entire careers spend full seasons chasing a single FIBA world record. Decorated international careers get built around one record-breaking performance on the right night against the right opponent. Caitlin Clark broke 5 of them in under 20 minutes of court time. Not across a tournament, not spread over multiple games. In one appearance, in her very first senior team USA debut against Senegal, while coming off the bench, while technically still finding her rhythm, while still working on getting her lungs back, as she had described it herself just days before. That is not a comeback story. That is something else entirely.
Overall, a good game. The entire game changed the minute she got in there, as every game does usually. Caitlin Clark has a problem. Caitlin Clark has a problem. Number one, she's too good. She's running circles around people. She can drop 30, 40 on your head. She can give you 15, 18 assists if everybody catches and scores. She's a problem. She changes the entire pace of games. It's ridiculous. And then on top of being good, she's also global. She's iconic.
Let's be specific about what happened against Senegal, because the details matter more than the headline. Clark's first 3 touches of her senior team USA career were 3 assists. Not a warm-up shot, not a cautious entry pass, not a moment of settling in and testing the waters. 3 touches, 3 assists, right away. Statisticians watching the game started pulling up the FIBA record books in real time because the numbers they were tracking did not fit into any existing frame of reference. By the time the final buzzer sounded, she had rewritten 5 records that had been standing for years. Team USA beat Senegal by 64 points. Any reasonable coaching staff looks at that performance and arrives at one clear conclusion. This is the engine. This is what the entire offense runs through now. Everything else on this roster adjusts around her presence because her presence just turned a qualifying tournament game into a history lesson that nobody was prepared for.
First of the game.
I thought it was good. I thought we started off a little slow. I thought our second unit came in. It was really good. And then I thought overall in the second half we were pretty good.
Returning back since July, how's your body feeling? You got a lot of rhythm.
Feel good. Obviously, 5 games in 7 days is a true test and see where my body's at. But so far, I feel really good.
Playing at a national level, adult first time. How has it been so far with the fans here in Puerto Rico?
It's been great. I thought our game, especially versus Puerto Rico at 8 p.m., was a really fun one for us. The fans have been great. Fans that have come from America have been awesome. So anytime you get to put this jersey on, I think it's a really fun thing. You take a lot of pride in it.
Instead, what followed was deeply confusing. Clark came off the bench again the next game. Chelsea Gray, a talented and experienced guard who absolutely earned her roster spot, remained the starter. The rotations that Lawson put out on the floor started shifting in ways that made the actual plan increasingly difficult to identify. Minutes were inconsistent. Clark's touches fluctuated in ways that did not reflect what the numbers were clearly showing. And the offense that had looked electric the moment she stepped onto the floor became, across various stretches, noticeably slower and more difficult to move. The second game, against Puerto Rico, told its own story without needing commentary. It was not a blowout. It was messy. The passing was off. The pace was labored. There were stretches that looked nothing like the team that had demolished Senegal by 64 points just days before.
All right, Nate Tibbitz took the podium today to address things about the game. Caitlin Clark not starting. I believe there's some agenda behind this. Let's make this very clear. Chelsea Gray has started all 3 games. We have seen Angel restart games, Paige Becker start, Kelsey Plum started, Jackie Young started. We've seen everybody start. I think Stephanie White started one of the games. It's been absolutely ridiculous. We watched Kiki Iriafin get a start. It's only a couple games left. They said that they was rotating everybody into starting lineup and doing this and doing that.
The difference was not the opponent. Puerto Rico is a solid team, but they were not good enough to make a roster that talented look hesitant. Something else was driving that hesitation. Here is the detail that made the whole picture even more uncomfortable. Puerto Rico ran a box-and-one defense against Team USA. A box-and-one is a scheme reserved for one specific situation. You believe one player on the opposing team is so dangerous that your entire defensive structure needs to be dedicated to removing her from a game. Puerto Rico, a team that was going to lose regardless of what they tried, still built their entire game plan around stopping Caitlin Clark. The opposing coach gave Clark more credit in his defensive preparation than her own coaching staff appeared to give her in the offensive rotation. When fans started pointing that out, the coaching response was not exactly clarifying. After the Puerto Rico game, a reporter asked Lawson a direct question about Clark's role in the offense. It was not a loaded question. It was not designed to provoke. It was the most obvious question in the room, asked calmly by someone doing exactly what journalists are supposed to do. What followed was a genuine masterclass in saying a significant amount without actually answering anything. Lawson talked about team balance. She talked about every player on the roster being accustomed to being a star in their own program. She talked about spreading opportunity and giving everyone a chance to find their footing. All of that is technically accurate. None of it was what anyone was asking about. Nobody watching was confused about whether the team had talent. The roster included Paige Buchers, Angel Reese, Kelsey Plum, Chelsea Gray, Ryan Howard, and Aaliyah Boston. Of course there was talent. The question was about why the most statistically productive player on the floor was being managed like a rotating contributor rather than the primary engine of the offense. The non-answer was, in its own way, an answer. And here is where things started to look less like a stylistic preference and more like something coordinated. Because sharing that coaching ecosystem was Stephanie White, who coaches Clark at the professional level with the Indiana Fever. If you had been watching closely during the WNBA season, you had already seen a version of this same pattern. Slow the pace. Move Clark off the ball. Limit how much she orchestrates in open space. Turn one of the most gifted playmakers in the sport into something slightly more contained and manageable. By itself, you might call that a coaching philosophy. When you see the same philosophy applied by two coaches both connected to the same player, it starts to feel less like philosophy and more like a shared approach. Fans noticed. Basketball fans argue about everything, but they're particularly good at recognizing when a system feels managed rather than natural. And what they were watching was a team that moved like a precision instrument when Clark was running the show and struggled to find a consistent identity when she was not. Now here is the layer of this story that got partially buried under the rotation drama, but actually explains a meaningful amount about how the tournament unfolded. Kara Lawson was not just the head coach of Team USA during the Puerto Rico qualifying tournament. She was simultaneously the head coach of the Duke women's basketball program, which in early March of 2026 was right in the middle of its postseason run. Duke was a top seed. They had genuine championship ambitions, and Lawson was attempting to manage both programs at the same time, splitting her attention across two completely different competitive responsibilities. The schedule overlap was serious and well documented. When Team USA was in Puerto Rico, Duke was preparing for tournament play. Lawson's assistants at Duke were absorbing more responsibility in her absence. Here is the part that was actually confirmed before the first game in Puerto Rico was even played. Team USA officially stated that Kara Lawson would be departing Puerto Rico before the qualifying tournament concluded. She was never going to be there for all 5 games. That was known from the start, which means that from the moment the tournament began, the head coach of Team USA was operating with a countdown clock already running. She arrived in Puerto Rico knowing she was going to leave before it was over. That context reframes a lot of what followed. Was she trying to install a system she genuinely believed in before handing things off? Was she trying to ensure everyone had minutes and rhythm before the transition? Was there pressure from within the organization about how certain players should be deployed? Nobody outside those rooms knows for certain. What is certain is that the results were not what the talent level on that roster should have produced. And then, with 3 games remaining, Kara Lawson was simply gone. Not a gradual transition, not a ceremonial farewell on the sideline, not a formal press conference with a clean explanation. Just gone. 3 games left in the tournament, and the sideline suddenly belonged to someone else entirely. Nate Tibbitz, head coach of the Phoenix Mercury, stepped in. Tibbitz did not arrive with a long philosophical speech about how he planned to approach things. He did not hold a meeting about fairness and equitable distribution of touches. He did not form a committee to deliberate about whether the obvious thing was actually the right thing. He looked at the roster, identified the best player, and started her. That was it. The starting lineup he put on the floor featured Caitlin Clark alongside Paige Buchers, Kelsey Plum, Angel Reese, and Ryan Howard. No drama attached to that decision. No extended explanation required. He looked at what he had and did what any reasonable observer had been waiting for someone to do since the first game of the tournament. What happened next was not just a win. It was a statement with a scoreboard attached. Team USA beat New Zealand by 55 points, 101-46. And not in the kind of sloppy, things just happen to fall right way that sometimes inflates margins. In a genuinely dominant, controlled, operating at a completely different altitude kind of way. Ryan Howard came out immediately and put on a show, draining 6 3-pointers on her way to 18 points to lead all scorers. Clark contributed 14 points, 6 assists, 2 steals, and 4 perfect free throws in 23 minutes before coming off the floor with the game already decided. The offense flowed. The spacing clicked immediately. Players who had looked slightly uncomfortable in previous games, losing the ball in situations where they should not have had to think, suddenly looked like they remembered how basketball was supposed to feel. The pace was relentless. Defenses were not just adjusting to what was happening. They were genuinely panicking. And every bit of it traced back to one change. The simplest possible change. After the game, Tibbitz did not deflect or protect the previous system with careful language. He acknowledged that the constant rotation changes had not worked, that this group needed consistency, and that the lineup featuring Clark and the other core players made sense. In coaching language, that is about as close as you get to saying out loud that the approach before his arrival was wrong. He did not name anyone. He was not trying to start a fight. He just spoke plainly, and the scoreboard had already made the rest of the argument for him. But the New Zealand blowout was not the end of the story. It was the moment the story accelerated. By the time the full tournament concluded in Puerto Rico, Caitlin Clark had not broken 5 records. She had broken 14 FIBA world records across the entire qualifying week. 14 records covering assists, passing efficiency, and overall impact metrics from a player making her first appearance on the senior international stage. Records that, in some cases, had stood for years against the best international performances the women's game had ever produced. And then she won tournament Most Valuable Player. She became the youngest player in FIBA qualifying history to ever receive that award. The player who had arrived, saying she needed time to find a rhythm. The player who came off the bench for her first 2 appearances. The player whose role had generated so much confusion and so many non-answers at the podium. Tournament MVP, 14 world records. All of it in a single week in San Juan, Puerto Rico. If the earlier rotation decisions looked difficult to explain after the New Zealand game, they became almost impossible to justify in light of how the full week ended. You do not win tournament Most Valuable Player and break 14 world records while being deployed incorrectly. You win it and break those records when someone finally removes the ceiling and lets you play without limitation. Tibbitz had removed the ceiling. The results are not ambiguous. The reason this story does not stay in Puerto Rico is Stephanie White. White coaches Clark at the professional level with the Indiana Fever. The patterns that played out in Puerto Rico are directly relevant to what Clark's WNBA season is going to look like. And now, there's a very clear, very documented, very public comparison sitting at the center of that conversation. System 1, manage Clark's role, control her touches, distribute the offense, slow the game down, keep everyone equally involved. System 2, give Clark the ball, let her read the floor, let her dictate the tempo, and let the teammates around her benefit from what that creates. One of those systems just produced 14 world records and a tournament Most Valuable Player award. The other produced hesitant offense, inconsistent rotations, and a game against Puerto Rico that made a roster loaded with elite players look like strangers try to figure out where to stand. WNBA front offices are paying close attention right now. Analysts are re-watching footage from both phases of the tournament, tracking possessions, counting touches, comparing the way the ball moved under each approach. Fans who had already sensed something was off now have documented undeniable evidence that their instincts were pointing at something real. And Stephanie White is operating under a level of scrutiny heading into the WNBA season that is considerably sharper than it was a month ago. That is not an accusation. That is the reality of coaching one of the most watched athletes in women's sports. When 2 clearly contrasting approaches produce results this different with the exact same player, the conversation does not stay polite and academic. It becomes direct. And the Indiana Fever's upcoming season is now framed around a very specific question that fans are not going to stop asking. Which version of Caitlin Clark are we actually going to see when the season tips off? The 2028 Los Angeles Olympics are also coming. Team USA needs to figure out its identity and build towards something before that stage arrives. The Puerto Rico tournament just handed the organization a roadmap nobody expected to receive this early or this clearly. The map is not complicated. It does not require lengthy interpretation. You watch what the answer looks like in real time. The only question is whether the people with decision-making authority choose to follow it. Through all of it, Caitlin Clark said nothing. No dramatic interviews making demands. No social media posts with carefully selected words sitting just below the surface. No passive energy directed at cameras or reporters designed to be replayed in slow motion. She just played basketball. She stayed locked in, stayed completely professional, and produced at a historically unprecedented level while the people around her were actively debating whether to fully deploy her. That silence turned out to be louder than anything else about this entire situation. When the player at the center of a controversy stays quiet and keeps producing at a record-breaking level, everyone else gets stuck doing the explaining. And explaining why you bench someone who just broke 5 world records and then kept their role limited while they broke 5 more and then watch them win tournament MVP anyway is not a clean position to defend publicly. The silence from Clark stripped away every available excuse and left only the most obvious variable standing. She was not the problem. She was never the problem. There was a moment in the locker room footage that circulated during the tournament, brief and almost certainly not intended to generate any particular reaction, where Clark was visibly in her own world, head down, locked in, entirely removed from the energy filling the room around her, not performing frustration, not sulking for the benefit of anyone watching, just internally somewhere else entirely, like someone who has already decided what they're going to do and is simply waiting for the moment to arrive. Looking back at how the week unfolded, maybe that is exactly what it was. Because the player who came out of that preparation broke 14 world records, won the most valuable player award for the entire tournament, and reminded every person watching that the gap between her potential and the ceiling some coaches seemed determined to put on it is not as manageable as anyone had decided to believe. She did not need to say a single word. The numbers said all of it. Here is where everything circles back to the one question the basketball world cannot let go of. If the answer was always this obvious, if starting Caitlin Clark and letting her operate at full capacity was always going to produce this kind of result, then the harder question is why it required a coaching departure for anyone to finally act on it. That is not a rhetorical point. That is a genuine question that the entire women's basketball ecosystem is now sitting with, and it reaches far beyond one qualifying tournament on an island in the Caribbean. We're talking about the most commercially significant player in the history of the WNBA. A player whose arrival transformed television ratings, ticket demand, merchandise revenue, and general public interest in women's basketball at a scale the sport had not seen before. A player who just broke 14 world records in her first international week. A player who, when fully unleashed, makes every single teammate around her demonstrably better. Not marginally better, not slightly easier to work with, measurably, historically better. And the persistent instinct in certain coaching circles keeps drifting back toward the same approach. Slow her down. Distribute the responsibilities more evenly. Make sure no single player dominates the identity of the system. You just watched what that approach looks like in practice. Then you watch what happens when someone throws it out and gives her the ball. The results are not separated by a small margin. They are separated by 55 points and 14 world records and a tournament MVP trophy. The receipts are documented, public, and permanent. As the WNBA season approaches and the focus shifts back to the Indiana Fever, there is now an international case study sitting at the center of every conversation about how Clark should be used. Front offices cannot pretend it does not exist. Analysts cannot wave it away as an isolated result. Fans are not going to forget what they watched happen in Puerto Rico. And any decision to slow Clark down or limit her role heading into the season now carries a weight it did not carry before, because now everyone is seeing exactly what the alternative looks like when someone actually commits to it. The moment someone stopped trying to manage Caitlin Clark, the entire operation snapped back into focus. The records followed. The MVP followed. The blowout followed. Everyone watching saw it, and everyone watching knows what the right answer is. The only thing left to answer is whether the right people are actually willing to choose it. And that is what makes this story so much bigger than 5 qualifying games on an island in the Caribbean. It was supposed to be a routine return, a low-stakes warm-up before the real competitive season began. A chance for a superstar coming back from injury to ease back into competition at the international level. Instead, it became one of the most revealing weeks in recent women's basketball history. A direct, real-time comparison of 2 completely different philosophies producing completely different results, with the same player at the center of both, and zero ambiguity about which direction the evidence pointed. Caitlin Clark heads into the WNBA season carrying 14 world records, a tournament MVP award, and the kind of momentum that only builds when something undeniable happens in front of a global audience. The debate about whether she belongs at the highest level of this sport is over. It was over before Puerto Rico, but Puerto Rico removed even the theoretical space for the argument to continue. What remains is the practical question. What do the people making decisions around her actually do with everything that just happened in full public view? The cameras are still rolling. The fans are still watching. The analysts are still keeping score in ways that go well beyond what appears on a stat sheet. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think happens next. Do you believe Stephanie White adjusts her approach with the Indiana Fever this season? Or do we see the same system that got exposed in Puerto Rico? Subscribe and turn on notifications because this story is not finished. Not even close. The next chapter starts the moment the WNBA season tips off, and we will be here for every single development.